Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Soul String Stories. Today, I bring you a powerful and deeply loving story asterisk. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Sterling Enterprises as Victoria Hart gathered her belongings from her desk. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed each item into the cardboard box. A small succulent plant, a coffee mug with a faded logo. 3 years of loyalty reduced to objects that fit in a single container. Damian Blackwood stood by the floor two ceiling windows of his office, his silhouette dark against the city skyline. He had not looked at her once during the entire conversation. His voice when he spoke was ice wrapped in silk. "The client lost $2 million because of your error. 2 million, Miss Hart. In my company there is no room for incompetence." Victoria's throat burned with unshed tears. "Sir, I reviewed those documents 3 times. The numbers were correct when I submitted them. Someone must have altered the file after I sent it for approval. Excuses change nothing." He finally turned to face her, his gray eyes devoid of warmth. "Your employment here is terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you out." The walk through the office was a parade of shame. Colleagues who had shared lunch breaks and birthday cakes suddenly found their computer screens fascinating. Whispers followed her like ghosts, each one a small knife in her pride. Jennifer from accounting actually smirked. Thomas from marketing looked away quickly, guilt written across his features. Victoria had admired Damian Blackwood once from a distance, of course, because men like him existed in a different atmosphere than people like her. She had watched him command boardrooms, make decisions that moved markets, carry the weight of an empire on shoulders that never seemed to bend. She had thought him brilliant, driven, untouchable. Now she knew he was simply cruel. The elevator doors closed on her old life. Victoria allowed herself exactly 30 seconds to fall apart. Then she straightened her spine, wiped her eyes, stepped out into the street to face an uncertain future. The survival 6 months passed like a slow drowning. Victoria took on freelance work, taught English to international students online, walked dogs for busy professionals. Her small apartment became smaller as bills piled up. Pride prevented her from asking family for help. Stubbornness kept her applying for jobs, even when rejection emails arrived daily. She had almost forgotten about Damian Blackwood when her phone rang on a Tuesday morning. "Miss Hart, this is Julian Cross, executive assistant to Mr. Blackwood. He requests a meeting with you this afternoon at 3 Wow." Victoria's first instinct was to refuse. Her second was curiosity. Her third was the rent notice sitting on her kitchen counter stamped with red letters that screamed urgency. "I'll be there," she heard herself say. Sterling Enterprises looked exactly the same. The lobby still gleamed with expensive stone. Security guards still wore expressions of professional boredom. The elevator still smelled faintly of lemon polish. But Victoria was different. The woman who walked through these doors today wore armor made of hardship and survival. Julian Cross met her on the executive floor. He was younger than she expected, with kind eyes that seemed apologetic even before he spoke. "Mr. Blackwood is waiting in the conference room. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water? Answers?" Victoria said, "Those would be nice." He smiled sadly. "I wish I could provide them." The conference room was all glass and steel, designed to make visitors feel exposed. Damian sat at the head of the table, looking exactly as she remembered, impeccably dressed, impossibly handsome, infuriatingly composed. But something was different in the set of his shoulders, a tension that had not been there before. "Thank you for coming," he said, gesturing to a chair. Victoria remained standing. "I'm here. Say what you need to say." For the first time since she had known him, Damian Blackwood looked uncomfortable. He stood, walked to the window, then back to the table. His fingers drummed once against the polished surface before he seemed to force them still. "My father passed away 3 months ago. I'm sorry for your loss." The words came automatically. A social reflex. "Don't be. We weren't close." He opened a leather folder on the table, extracting a document. His will contained certain conditions regarding my inheritance of Sterling Enterprises. One of those conditions requires that I be married within 1 year of his death. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Victoria gripped the back of the chair. "I need a wife," Damian continued, his voice carefully neutral. "Not a real marriage. A contractual arrangement." 1 year of your time in exchange for financial compensation that will set you up for life. You're joking. I don't joke about business. Victoria laughed, a sharp sound with no humor in it. You destroyed my career. You humiliated me in front of everyone I knew. And now you want me to save your empire. Yes. His gray eyes met hers directly. Because you're intelligent, discreet, and you have every reason to keep this arrangement strictly professional. You won't develop misplaced emotional attachments. Misplaced emotional attachments, she repeated slowly. Is that what you call human feelings? I call them complications. He slid the document across the table. This is the contract. Read it. Consider it. The offer expires in 48 hours. Victoria picked up the papers with fingers that had stopped shaking. The numbers on the page made her dizzy. The terms were clear. 1 year of marriage. Separate living spaces within his home. Public appearances as required. Complete confidentiality. And at the end, a sum of money that represented more than she could earn in 10 years. Why me? She asked quietly. For a moment, something flickered across his face. Regret, guilt, it vanished before she could name it. 'Cause I owe you more than an apology. Consider this restitution. The decision vector sat in her apartment that night. The contract spread across her small kitchen table. Rain tapped against the windows, a rhythm that matched her racing thoughts. Every logical part of her brain screamed to refuse to maintain her dignity. To tell Damian Blackwood exactly what he could do with his contract. But logic had not paid her rent in 6 months. Dignity had not filled her refrigerator. Pride would not save her from eviction. She thought about her mother working 3 jobs to raise her alone. She thought about the scholarship she had earned through sheer determination, the degree she had fought for, the career that had been stolen from her by a man who now offered her a lifeline wrapped in barbed wire. At 2 in the morning, Victoria picked up her phone and sent a text message to Julian Cross. I accept. Where do I sign the wedding? The ceremony took place in a courthouse witnessed by Julian and a lawyer whose name Victoria immediately forgot. There were no flowers, no music, no guests. Damian wore a charcoal suit. Victoria wore a simple cream dress she had purchased from a consignment shop. The judge spoke words about commitment and partnership that felt obscene in their emptiness. When instructed to exchange rings, Damian produced 2 platinum bands that probably cost more than her car. They were beautiful and cold, like everything else about him. You may kiss the bride. Damian hesitated for the first time that day. Then he leaned in, his lips brushing against hers so briefly it might have been imagined. But Victoria felt it, that moment of contact, and something electric passed between them that had nothing to do with contracts or convenience. As they left the courthouse, married in every legal sense and strangers in every other way, Damian opened the car door for her. Before she climbed inside, he spoke so quietly she almost missed it. It's just a contract. Don't get attached. Victoria looked at him, then really looked at him. She saw the walls he had built, the distance he maintained, the fear he disguised as control. And in that moment, she made a decision that had nothing to do with money or revenge. She smiled, small and secret. The problem with walls, Damian, is that they keep you in as much as they keep others out. His expression remained carefully blank, but his fingers tightened almost imperceptibly on the car door. As they drove toward the Blackwood mansion and an uncertain future, neither of them spoke. But the silence between them felt alive, charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. Victoria stared out the window at the passing city, wondering if she had just made the biggest mistake of her life, or if perhaps somewhere in the ruins of pride and the machinery of convenience, something real might accidentally bloom. The contract said 1 year, her heart, foolish and stubborn, whispered that some stories refuse to end when the papers say they should. The Blackwood mansion was not a home. It was a monument to success, a museum of achievement, where every piece of furniture costs more than most people earned in a year. Victoria's footsteps echoed on Italian marble as Julian showed her to her. Quarters, a suite of rooms on the eastern wing that felt both luxurious and isolating. Mr. Blackwood's rooms are in the western wing, Julian explained, his tone apologetic. The staff will attend to anything you need. Breakfast is served at 7, though Mr. Blackwood usually leaves by 6 here. Of course he does, Victoria murmured. That first night, She lay in a bed too large and too soft, staring at a ceiling painted with delicate frescoes. Somewhere in this vast house, Damian was doing the same. They were married, legally bound, and more alone than ever. The next morning, Victoria woke to find Damian already gone. A note on the kitchen counter written in decisive handwriting informed her that a car would take her shopping for appropriate clothing. A credit card was attached, black and heavy with unspoken expectations. She wanted to tear it in half. Instead, she pocketed it and made herself coffee in a kitchen that could have served a restaurant. The housekeeper, an older woman named Patricia, watched her with kind but curious eyes. "You're different from what I expected," Patricia said, setting down fresh flowers. "What did you expect? Someone who looked like they belonged here?" Patricia smiled. "But maybe that's exactly what this house needs. Someone real?" Cracks in the ice days turned into weeks. Victoria and Damian moved around each other like planets, in separate orbits, occasionally visible but never touching. He left early, returned late, and when they did share space, he maintained a polite distance that felt more insulting than his coldness had. But Victoria was observant. She noticed things. She noticed how Damian's shoulders tensed when he thought no one was watching. She noticed the exhaustion in his eyes when he removed his jacket at the end of the day. She noticed that he ate dinner alone in his study, always working, never resting. She noticed, too, that he watched her. Quick glances when he thought she was not looking. A pause in the hallway when she played piano in the music room. Slight softening in his expression. When she laughed on the phone with a friend, the first crack appeared on a Thursday evening. Victoria was in the library surrounded by books. When Damian entered, he stopped short, clearly not expecting to find her there. "I didn't mean to intrude," he said. "It's your house. It's our house for now." You moved to the bookshelf, selecting a volume without really looking at it. "You read poetry?" Tori glanced at the book in her lap. Nutha, he understood longing. Something shifted in Damian's expression. "The saddest poem." "I know it. Of course you do." She closed the book. "You strike me as someone familiar with loss." He did not answer immediately. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than she had ever heard it. "My mother loved poetry. She used to read to me before she died." "How old were you?" 12. Old enough to remember everything. Young enough that it broke something in me. Victoria's heart constricted. This was not the cold CEO, the heartless boss. This was a man carrying grief-like stones in his pockets. "I'm sorry," she said simply. Damian looked at her, then really looked at her, and for a moment the distance between them felt less like miles and more like a single step neither dared to take. "So am I," he said. Then he left, taking the unnamed book with him. The gala, the charity gala, arrived with all the elegance and pretension Victoria had dreaded. She wore a midnight blue gown that hugged her figure, her hair swept up to reveal the graceful line of her neck. When she descended the staircase, Damian was waiting in the foyer, devastating in a tailored tuxedo. His eyes widened slightly when he saw her. "You look beautiful." "I look expensive," she corrected. "There's a difference." "Not tonight." He offered his arm. "Shall we?" The ballroom glittered with wealth and ambition. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across faces that smiled without warmth. Victoria recognized several people from her time at Sterling Enterprises, including Jennifer, who looked at her with undisguised shock. "That's the former secretary?" Someone whispered. Not quietly enough. Apparently she landed on her feet or on her back. Victoria's spine stiffened, but before she could respond, Damian's hand tightened on her waist. His voice, when he addressed the group, was pleasant and deadly. "Gentlemen, I believe you were discussing my wife. Please continue. I'm fascinated to hear your opinions about the woman intelligent enough to see past my bank account." The men palled. Apologies stuttered out. Damian dismissed them with a look that could have frozen oceans. "You didn't have to do that," Victoria said quietly. "Yes, I did." His jaw was tight. "I won't have anyone disrespect you, but you did. 6 months ago you destroyed my reputation. Stop dancing." His gray eyes filled with something that looked like pain. "I know, and I've regretted it every day since." The music swelled around them, but Victoria heard only her own heartbeat. "Why?" "Because 3 days after I fired you, I discovered that Thomas from marketing had altered those documents. You confessed when threatened with legal action. You were innocent, and I was too proud to admit I had been wrong." The ballroom seemed to fade away. You knew, I knew, and instead of apologizing, instead of making it right, I convinced myself that you were better off away from me on this world. He gestured at the glittering crowd. I told myself I was protecting you. That's not protection, Damian. That's cowardice. I know. His thumb traced a small circle on her waist, an unconscious gesture that made her breath catch. I'm not good at this, at feeling things. My father taught me that emotions were weaknesses, that love was a liability. So I built walls and called it strength. Victoria looked up at him, seeing past the armor to the lonely boy who had lost his mother, the man who had forgotten how to be human. And now she whispered, "Now those walls are crumbling, and I don't know how to stop it." His voice was raw. You terrify me, Victoria, because when I'm near you, I remember what it feels like to want something more than power. The song ended around them. Couples separated and applause filled the air, but Damian and Victoria remained frozen, caught in a moment that felt both fragile and inevitable. This is just a contract, she said, repeating his words from their wedding day. It has handcuffed her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone. Because it stopped feeling like business the moment you walked into my library and understood my grief without me having to explain it. The first kiss, they left the gala early. The car ride home charged with unspoken tension. Rain began to fall as they pulled into the circular driveway, drops spattering against the windows like urgent messages. Damian walked her to the door, his hand at the small of her back. Inside, the mansion was quiet, the staff already retired for the evening. They stood in the grand foyer, and neither moved toward their separate wings. "Victoria," Damian began. She turned, and whatever he saw on her face made him step closer. His hand rose, fingers threading through her hair, and she realized she was trembling. "Tell me to stop," he whispered. "I can't." The kiss was nothing like their brief, obligatory touch at the courthouse. This was heat and hunger, months of tension finding release. His hands framed her face like she was something precious, breakable, worth protecting. Her fingers clutched his jacket, pulling him closer, desperate to eliminate the space that had divided them for so long. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Damian pressed his forehead to hers, eyes closed. "This complicates everything," he said. "I know. We agreed not to get attached." "I know, Victoria." He opened his eyes, and they were storm-dark with emotion. "I'm already attached. I think I have been since the moment you smiled at me and told me that walls keep people in as much as out." Her heart felt too large for her chest. "Damian, this is dangerous. In 9 months, this ends. The contract expires and we both walk away. Then let's change the contract." His thumb traced her lower lip. "Let's make this real." She wanted to. God, how she wanted to, but fear held her back. The same fear that had probably held him back for years. "Ask me again tomorrow," she whispered. "When we're thinking clearly." He nodded slowly, then pressed one more kiss to her forehead, gentle and devastating. "Tomorrow? Then?" "Every tomorrow after that, until you believe I mean it." For 3 weeks, Victoria lived in a dream. Damian came home early. They shared dinners that stretched into hours, walked through the gardens, hand in hand. He was learning to laugh, to relax, to exist outside the armor he had worn for so long. She was learning to trust, to hope, to imagine a future beyond contractual obligations. They had not yet changed the agreement, but they had changed everything else. Then came the morning that shattered the illusion. Victoria was in Damian's study, looking for a book he had promised to lend her. When she noticed a folder marked estate documents partially hidden under other papers, she would not have looked. She had no reason to invade his privacy. But the folder slipped, papers cascading across the desk, and one particular document caught her eye. Addendum to the last will and testament of Richard Blackwood. Her hands shook as she read the clause outlined in neat legal language. If Damian failed to remain married for the full year, or if the marriage was dissolved before the anniversary date, control of Sterling Enterprises would pass to the board of directors. He would retain a minority stake, but lose everything his family had built. Worse, there was a section about the spouse. Any financial compensation promised to the contractual spouse will be rendered null and void should the marriage end prematurely. The words blurred. Victoria sat down hard in Damian's leather chair, the document trembling in her hands. This was why he needed her. Not because he had developed feelings. Not because he wanted to make things right. He needed her because his entire empire depended on her staying for 12 months. Every kiss had been strategy. Every tender word had been insurance. She had been so stupid, so willing to believe that someone like Damian Blackwood could actually fall for someone like her. The door opened behind her. She did not need to turn to know it was him. Victoria's voice was careful. "What are you doing in here?" She stood, holding up the document. "Learning the truth." His face went pale. "That's not what you think." "Really?" "Because it looks like you conveniently forgot to mention that if I leave before our anniversary, you lose everything, and I get nothing. When were you planning to tell me? Or were you just going to keep playing the devoted husband for 9 more months? I was going to tell you. I just needed the right time." "The right time?" She laughed bitterly. "How about before you kissed me? Before you made me believe this was real?" Damian stepped forward, hands raised as if approaching something wild. "It is real. What I feel for you has nothing to do with that contract. How convenient that your feelings appeared exactly when you needed them most. That's not fair." "Fair." Victoria's voice rose. "You want to talk about fair? You fired me, destroyed my reputation, then offered me a marriage contract without disclosing all the terms. And now you expect me to believe you actually care." "I do care." He reached for her, but she stepped back. "Victoria, please. Yes, the contract binds us both, but what I feel for you transcends any legal document. Prove it." She threw the papers at him. "Walk away from the company. Choose me over your empire. Prove that I'm more than just a means to an end." The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Damian's jaw worked, emotions wearing across his face. Finally he spoke, and his voice was raw. "I can't. That company is my father's legacy. It's everything he built. Hundreds of people depend on it for their livelihoods." "Then you've made your choice." Victoria walked past him, each step feeling like a small death. "Enjoy your empire, Damian. I hope it keeps you warm at night." His hand caught her arm, gentle but desperate. "Don't leave like this." She looked back at him. This man she had begun to love despite every logical reason not to. Tears streaked her face, and she did not bother to wipe them away. "I'm not leaving yet. We have a contract, remember? I'll stay for the full year because, unlike you, I keep my promises. But this," she gestured between them, "is over." The separation, they became ghosts haunting the same house. Victoria moved through the mansion like a shadow, attending required functions with a smile that never reached her eyes. Damian buried himself in work, leaving before dawn and returning after midnight. When they did cross paths, the air between them felt brittle enough to shatter. Patricia watched them both with sad eyes. "You're breaking each other's hearts," she told Victoria one morning. "Hearts can't break if they were never whole to begin with." But that was a lie. Victoria's heart was very much broken, cracked down the center by the weight of betrayal and the ache of what might have been. 6 weeks passed in this fashion. 6 weeks of separate beds and careful distance, of words left unspoken and touches withheld. The anniversary date loomed like a finish line neither of them wanted to cross. The sacrifice of Victoria woke on a Tuesday morning to find the house in unusual chaos. Patricia was crying in the kitchen. Julian was on the phone, his voice sharp with urgency, and Damian was nowhere to be found. "What happened?" Victoria demanded. Julian hung up, his face grave. "He did it. He actually did it." "Did what?" "Signed over his controlling shares to the board. Effective immediately, Damian Blackwood is no longer CEO of Sterling Enterprises." The room tilted. "That's not possible. The contract states he has to remain married for the full year." He invoked a clause that allows him to forfeit his inheritance voluntarily. It's rare, almost never used, but it's there. Julian's eyes were bright. He gave it all up. The company, the money, everything. He said he'd rather lose his empire than spend one more day hurting you. Victoria could not breathe. "Where is he?" "I don't know." He left before dawn. She found him in the last place she expected. The small park 3 blocks from her old apartment. He sat on a bench dressed in jeans and a simple sweater, looking more human than she had ever seen him. No armor, no walls, just a man who had lost everything and looked somehow lighter for it. "You're an idiot," she said, sitting beside him. He smiled sadly. "I know. You gave up your father's company. Everything you worked for. Not everything. He turned to face her. I realized that building an empire means nothing if I'm alone at the top. My father spent his whole life chasing power, and it made him miserable. I don't want to become him, Damian. Her voice broke. You didn't have to do this? Yes, I did it. He took her hand and his fingers were warm. You asked me to prove that you were more than a means to an end. So I'm proving it. No company, no contract, no conditions, just me choosing you. Tears spilled down her cheeks. What if I'm not worth it? What if we crash and burn? Then we crash and burn together. He cupped her face, thumbs wiping away her tears. I love you, Victoria. Not because I need you for a contract. Not because you're convenient. I love you because you saw past my walls and showed me what it means to actually live. You terrify me, she whispered. Good. You terrify me, too. He pressed his forehead to hers. Love is supposed to be terrifying. It's the only thing worth being afraid of. She kissed him then, tasting salt and rain and the promise of new beginnings. When they pulled apart, both were crying and laughing and holding each other like they might disappear if they let go. What do we do now? Victoria asked. Now, Damian smiled, real and unguarded. Now we write a new contract, one that has nothing to do with money or time limits. One that says we're in this together, for better or worse. For richer or poorer. That sounds like wedding vows. Maybe it is. He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. Inside was a simple gold band with a single inscription. No conditions. Damian Blackwood, are you proposing to your own wife? I'm proposing to the woman I love. The wife thing is just a technicality. He slid the ring onto her finger beside the platinum band she had never removed. Marry me again, Victoria. Not because a contract says you have to, because you want to. She looked at him. This man who had humiliated her, hurt her, and ultimately chosen her over everything else. She saw his flaws and his fears, his strength and his vulnerability. She saw a future that would not be easy, but would be real. She said simply 1,000 times. Yes. The beginning they did not return to the mansion. Instead, they went to Victoria's old apartment. Tiny and imperfect, and absolutely perfect. They made coffee in the cramped kitchen, laughed about burning toast, and planned a future that had nothing to do with empires or expectations. Damian took a position as a consultant, using his skills to help struggling businesses. Victoria finished her master's degree and started her own company. They bought a small house with a garden, adopted a rescue dog named Mercy, and learned what it meant to build a life based on love rather than obligation on their real anniversary. 1 year from the day they remarried, they renewed their vows in that same courthouse. This time, Patricia was there crying happy tears. Julian stood his best man, grinning like he had won a bet. And when the judge pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss was not brief or obligatory. It was everything. Later, as they walked through the park where Damian had chosen her over his empire, Victoria stopped and looked up at him. Do you ever regret it? Giving up everything. He pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. I didn't give up everything. I gave up what I thought mattered to gain what actually does. It's very wise. I have a very wise wife. She laughed, the sound carrying on the evening breeze. I love you, Damian Blackwood. Even when you're being an idiot, especially when I'm being an idiot. He spun her around, dancing to music only they could hear. And I love you, Victoria Blackwood. Not because a contract says I have to, but because you want to, she finished. Always, he promised. Without conditions, without limits, just love. And as the sun set over the city that had witnessed their fall and their rise, two people who had started as strangers, become enemies, turned into reluctant partners, and finally chose each other, learned the most important truth of all. Love is not something you sign a contract for. It is not something you earn or deserve or plan. Love is the choice you make every single day to stay, to fight, to build something real with another imperfect human. And that choice is made freely and without reservation is the only contract worth keeping. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to click like, share this story with your friends and family, and subscribe to Docanel so you don't miss out on more and meaningful stories.